situation in Malaya has become slightly stabilized with the going into action of fresh Australian troops. Reports from Washington have indicated that American bombers are now taking their turns in bombing Japanese air bases in Malaya. In the Philippines, the fighting has assumed a desultory nature, with General MacArthur firmly holding his position in Bataan Peninsula. Here is the news from Chungking. At a press conference for foreign correspondents this afternoon, Dr. P.S. Hu, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, made the following statement. There is a general anxiety over the military development in Malaya. The strategic importance of Singapore and the Dutch East Indies is generally recognized, and we are sure that no effort will be spared by all of the allies to hold them. One of the many things of which China may well be proud is the part which overseas Chinese are playing in the war. Until recently, only the economic activities of the millions of Chinese in the South Sea had attracted the notice of the world. Now in Burma, Malaya, the Philippines, and the MEI, Chinese nationals have merged their interests with that of the natives, and their services in an all-out war effort are warmly appreciated by the various colonial powers. When fully mobilized, they will surely play a very important part in winning the war. To those who recall that the Netherlands was among the first to declare war upon Japan, the declaration of war by Japan on the Netherlands on January 12th must have seemed another enigma of Japanese diplomacy. To my thinking, declared Dr. Fu, it was but another instance of Japanese intrigue to estrange the Netherlands from Britain and the United States in order to score another bloodless conquest of Netherlands possessions. The unequivocal reply given by the Dutch Navy, which has taken such a heavy toll of Japanese ships, should convince the Japanese militarists that they are once again mistaken in their judgment. China, continued Dr. Fu, is following with great interest the Pan-American Conference now in session in Rio de Janeiro. Now that we, like a number of American states, are engaged in a common struggle against the Axis powers, what passes at the conference is naturally as much a matter of concern to us as it is to our allies across the Pacific. It is our hope that the present conference will achieve much in cementing American solidarity, and that all American states will align themselves in a common front and show greater effort in opposing the Axis. All in the Chinese government, continued the government spokesman, especially we in the Waijiao-Bu, regret the transfer of Sir Archibald Carr to Moscow. He has been a real friend of China and has done more than anyone else in bringing about the good relations between China and his own country. His charming personality, as well as his great achievements, will be ever remembered by all his friends here. We welcome his successor, Sir Horace Seymour, who, we understand, is a trusted friend of Mr. Eden and is well acquainted with the situation in the Orient. Reports have reached the government, Dr. Fu told foreign correspondents, that the Japanese army has compelled more than 1 million people to evacuate Hong Kong. The Chinese government has decided this morning to allocate $10 million for the relief of these refugees. In answer to questions, Dr. Fu said Hong Kong's pre-war population was 1,700,000. That communication between Hong Kong and Macau has been resumed, that receiving stations are being set up everywhere in Guangzhou under the direction of Mr. Xu Xiaoning, acting chairman of the National Relief Commission, to receive the refugees who are all Chinese and who are in critical condition. The refugees have started to arrive already, Dr. Fu declared. Continuing the news from Chungking. The Chinese Foreign Office made most of the headlines in the Chungking press today. Generalissimo Jiang, in this concurrent capacity as acting Minister of Foreign Affairs, gave a dinner last night in honor of the Netherlands Minister, Baron Casper van Brugel Douglas, and Baroness Douglas. The Baroness, however, was unable to attend on account of indisposition. The new Dutch envoy was accompanied by his secretary, Mr. H. Boss. The Generalissimo and Madame Jiang were assisted by the Vice Ministers of Foreign Affairs, while others present included leading government personalities. Toasts were proposed to the health of Queen Wilhelmina and Minister Douglas, who responded with a toast to the health of Chairman Lin Sun of the national government. Meanwhile, Sir Archibald Carr, the British ambassador, is being invited to various functions by Chinese organizations in Chungking. A luncheon party yesterday was given by the Sino-British Cultural Association. Today's Chinese War Communique reports that on the East Honan front, the beleaguered enemy at Huaiyang made a futile attempt to break through the Chinese encirclement last Thursday morning. An enemy unit reinforcing the Huaiyang garrison from the outside moved simultaneously to outflank the Chinese besieging forces, which, however, turned the tables by dealing severe blows on the Japanese reinforcing column, throwing it back with losses. The same day, the Chinese also recaptured a key point in the vicinity of Huaiyang to make their ring around the city all the stronger. On the central Hubei front, the Chinese recaptured two outer defense positions of Xinjiang last Tuesday afternoon, following a brief period of fighting. In Inner Mongolia, on the Suiyuan front, the Chinese are extending their guerrilla operations over widespread areas. A series of local successes has been achieved in the course of the past week. A late report from Changcha has revealed that in the recent battle there, the Japanese 3rd and 6th Divisions each suffered approximately 10,000 casualties, and altogether several hundreds of horses. Among those killed near the Hunan capital, according to the same report, were a Japanese brigade commander and a cavalry regimental commander. It is learned in Chungking that Mr. Hao Bun-hao, Chinese millionaire from Singapore, who miraculously escaped from Hong Kong during the siege, has arrived somewhere in Guangzhou. Meanwhile, Mr. A. Emmanuel Sachs, American member of the Chinese Currency Stabilization Board, has arrived in Calcutta en route to countries in the South Sea to study their financial and economic conditions. You are listening to the Voice of China in Chungking. The American volunteers in the Chinese Air Force are not only doing splendid work for the defense of the Belt Road and in bombing Japanese military objectives in Thailand, but are also doing their share to help China's war orphans. Since their arrival in China, the flyers have learned of the organization that Madame Chiang Kai-shek set up over 4 years ago to save this flotsam and jetsam of war. Their sympathies were fully aroused when they heard of the magnificent work that was being done despite financial and other difficulties. Consequently, they decided that they would play their part, and before the end of last year, they sent a collective Christmas present to Madame Jiang for her working in the form of more than 5,000 rupees, together with a letter expressing their admiration of the work that she and her assistants were doing, hoping that their gift would help in the noble cause. Madame Jiang, who takes a special interest in the American volunteers by reason of her association with the Chinese Air Force, has sent a letter of acknowledgement and thanks. The following is the latest message received from Washington by the Central News Agency concerning the situation in the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur's forces are believed to be still intact, despite the violent pummeling to which they have been subjected by long-range Japanese guns and scores of Japanese dive bombers. The latest reports from the fighting zone indicate that fighting has been less severe in the battle for position. General MacArthur has stated 6 weeks of hard fighting have made veterans of the Philippine Army's soldiers. Their training in the difficult style of battle experience has steadied them and developed their resourcefulness. They exact a costly toll from each Japanese attack. General MacArthur has formed a tight-knit line across the base of Bataan Peninsula, stretching from Subic Bay in the west to Manila Bay in the east. This gives the American Filipino forces an unobstructed avenue of retreat down to the south of Bataan Peninsula, where movements to the powerful fortress of Corregidor are possible. Military observers in Washington declared that General MacArthur has done a masterful job in carrying out his delaying action, which is considered especially brilliant in view of the fact that he has not received reinforcements since the Pearl Harbor attack. Meanwhile, Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau disclosed that prompt action by American officials in the Philippines prevented many millions worth of securities, coin, currency, bullion, jewelry, and other property from falling into the hands of the Japanese. This action is described as the first application, other than in China, of a scorched earth policy which any country has yet made in this class of valuables. Another message from Washington to Central News, although this is a little delayed. Senator Tom Colony, chairman of the important Senate Foreign Relations Committee, told the press on Saturday that the United States could not afford to neglect the Pacific in favor of war in any other part of the world. Another Washington senator, Millard Tarbell of Maryland, yesterday, Monday, made the prediction that before the end of this year, American troops will take up stations in all 6 continents of the earth, and that the total United States armed forces will eventually be increased to 8 million men. We are listening to the Voice of China in Chungking. Other news from Washington tells of peace in labor ranks. John L. Lewis, president of the United Mine Workers, on Saturday sent identical letters to William Green, president of the American Federation of Labor, and to Philip Murray, president of the CIO, urging resumption of peace negotiations, which were broken off by Lewis himself in 1939. The latest Gallup poll disclosed that an overwhelming majority of the nation's workers would like to see the AFL and the CIO joined in one organization. Meanwhile, Sidney Hillman, Associate Director of the Office of Production Management, told the United States Conference of Mayors in Washington that the nation must accomplish by December 1st of this year, 1 month ahead of schedule, the huge plane, tank, and shipbuilding program which President Roosevelt outlined for this year. Mr. Hillman said that the figure of total American workers in war industry must be raised to 15 million. These workers, he said, must produce 24 hours a day, 168 hours a week. This concludes the news from Chungking. We have been listening to the Voice of China, carried over XGOY in Chungking. Here is the news. At a press conference for foreign correspondents this afternoon, the Chinese government spokesman, who today was Dr. P.S. Hu, FOO, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, made the following statement. There is a general anxiety over the military development in Malaya. The strategic importance of Singapore and the Dutch East Indies is generally recognized, and we are sure that no effort will be spared by all of the allies to hold them. One of the many things of which China may well be proud is the part which overseas Chinese are playing in the war. Until recently, only the economic activities of the millions of Chinese in the South Seas had attracted the notice of the world. Now in Burma, Malaya, the Philippines, and the NEI, Chinese nationals have merged their interests with those of the natives, and their services in the all-out war effort are warmly appreciated by the various powers. When fully mobilized, they will surely play a very important part in winning the war. To those who recall that the Netherlands was among the first to declare war upon Japan following the outbreak of hostilities in the Pacific, the declaration of war by Japan on the Netherlands only on January 12th must have seemed another enigma of Japanese diplomacy. To my thinking, said the government spokesman in Chungking, it was but another instance of Japanese intrigue to estrange the Netherlands from Britain and the United States in order to score another bloodless conquest of the Netherlands' possession. The unequivocal reply given by the Dutch Navy, which has taken such a heavy toll of Japanese vessels, should convince the Japanese militarists that they are once more mistaken in their judgment. China is following with great interest the Pan-American Conference, which is now in session in Rio de Janeiro. Now that we, as a number of American states, are engaged in a common struggle against the Axis powers, what passes at the conference is naturally as much a matter of concern to us as it is to our allies across the Pacific. It is our hope that the present conference will achieve much in cementing American solidarity and that all American states will align themselves in a common front and show greater effort in opposing the Axis. All in the Chinese government, continued the spokesman, especially we in the Foreign Office, regret the transfer of Sir Archibald Clark Carr to Moscow. He has been a real friend of China and has done more than anyone else in bringing about the good relations between China and his own country. His charming personality, as well as his great achievements, will be ever remembered by all his friends here. We welcome his successor, Sir Horace Seymour, Seymour, who, we understand, is a trusted friend of Mr. Anthony Eden and is well acquainted with the situation in the Orient. The spokesman, before foreign correspondents, then gave some news. Reports have reached the government, he said, that the Japanese army has compelled more than 1 million people to evacuate Hong Kong. The Chinese government has decided this morning to allocate 10 million Chinese dollars for the relief of these refugees. In answer to questions, the spokesman said Hong Kong's pre-war population was 1,700,000. That communication between Hong Kong and Macau, MACAO, has been resumed. That receiving stations are being set up everywhere in Guangzhou under the direction of Mr. Xu Shiying, HSUSHIHYING, the acting chairman of the National Relief Commission, to receive the refugees, who are all Chinese and who are in a pitiful condition, and that the refugees have started to arrive already. The spokesman added that there was no official information about general conditions in Shanghai or Hong Kong. The spokesman also announced that the Netherlands government is sending Major General L. van Pemmen. Pemmen is spelled P-E-M-M-E-N, as military attaché to the Netherlands legation in Chungking. General Pemmen is reported to have left Batavia for Chungking. According to the spokesman, the dispatch of General Pemmen to Chungking furnishes another proof of the strengthening military cooperation between the Netherlands and this country. Asked if the reports carried by foreign newspapers to the effect that the British government had rejected China's offer to send troops to relieve Malaya from the Japanese pressure were well-founded, the spokesman answered, "The report is not correct. I understand that no divergence of views exists between the British and Chinese governments regarding the employment of Chinese troops in British territory." The spokesman said also that it was not true that the British had imposed a limit on the number of Chinese troops entering Burma. He said that the evacuation of Burma by some Chinese civilians was purely voluntary, and that the Chinese authorities would do whatever they could to facilitate such return to China. That is the end of the government spokesman's statement in Chungking today. Here is the war communique. Today's report, bulletin, reports that on the East Honan, H-O-N-A-N, front, the beleaguered enemy at Huaiyang, H-W-A-I-Y-A-N-G, made a futile attempt to break through the Chinese encirclement last Thursday morning. An enemy unit, to reinforce the Huaiyang garrison from the outside, moved simultaneously to outflank the Chinese besieging forces, which, however, turned the tables and dealt a heavy blow on the Japanese reinforcing column, throwing it back with losses. On the same day, the Chinese also recaptured a key point in the vicinity of Huaiyang to draw the encircling ring more tight. On the central Hubei, H-U-B-E-H, front, the Chinese recaptured two outer defense positions of Qianjiang, C-H-I-E-N-K-I-A-N-G, last Tuesday afternoon, following a brief period of fighting. Up in Inner Mongolia, on the Suiyuan, S-U-I-Y-U-A-N, front, the Chinese are extending their guerrilla operations over widespread areas. A series of local successes was achieved last week. A late report from Changsha has revealed that in a recent battle there, the Japanese 3rd and 6th Divisions each suffered approximately 10,000 casualties and many horses. Among those killed, near the Hunan capital, according to the same report, were a Japanese brigade commander and a cavalry regimental commander. Another report, this one from Shuguan, S-H-I-U-K-W-A-N, said that General Yu Han Mo, Y-U-H-A-N-M-O-U, Commander-in-Chief in Kwangtung, K-W-A-N-G-T-U-N-G province, has contributed $50,000 for the relief of refugees from Hong Kong. It is learned that Mr. Aw Boon Hao, A-W-B-O-O-N-H-A-W, Chinese millionaire from Singapore, who miraculously escaped from Hong Kong during the siege, has arrived somewhere in Kwangtung. Mr. A. Manuel Fox, American member of the Chinese Currency Stabilization Board, has arrived in Calcutta en route to countries in the South Seas to study their financial and economic conditions. You are listening to a news broadcast from Chungking. The Chinese Foreign Office made headlines in the Chungking press today, but the news was more in the nature of social news. Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, in his concurrent capacity as acting Minister of Foreign Affairs, gave a dinner last night in honor of the new Netherlands minister, Baron van Brugel Douglas and Baroness Douglas. However, the Baroness was unable to attend due to indisposition. The new Dutch envoy was accompanied by his secretary, Monsieur H. Voss, B.O.S. The Generalissimo and Madame Jiang were assisted by the two vice ministers of foreign affairs, while the guests present included leading government personalities. Toasts were proposed to the health of Queen Wilhelmina and Minister Douglas, who responded with a toast to the health of Mr. Lin Sen, chairman of the Chinese national government. Sir Archibald Carr, Clark Carr, British ambassador, whose transfer to Moscow was recently announced, was guest of honor at a luncheon party given by the Sino-British Cultural Association. Meanwhile, leading civic organizations in Chungking are arranging a series of receptions to Sir Archibald, which will be held during the next few days and weeks. Regret over the transfer of Sir Archibald and welcome to his successor was expressed by the Foreign Office spokesman in a statement issued last night. The American volunteers in the Chinese Air Force are not only doing a splendid job for the defense of the Burma Road and in bombing Japanese military objectives in Thailand, but are also doing their share to help the Chinese war orphans. Since their arrival in China, they have learned of the organization that Madame Chiang Kai-shek set up over 4 years ago to save this flotsam and jetsam of war, and their sympathies were fully aroused when they heard of the magnificent work that was being done despite financial and other difficulties. Consequently, they decided that they would play their part, and before the end of last year, they sent a collective Christmas present to Madame Jiang for her orphans in the form of more than 5,000 rupees, together with a letter expressing their warm admiration of the work that she and her assistants were doing, hoping that their gift would help in the cause. Madame Jiang, who takes a special interest in the American volunteers by reason of her association with the Chinese Air Force, has sent them a letter of acknowledgement and thanks. You are listening to a news broadcast from Chungking. At this time, your announcer will begin the story of a dramatic escape from Shanghai. The story is quite lengthy and will have to be concluded at this same hour in a North American transmission tomorrow. But as far as time allows, we will give the story this evening. It has come from Guilin, K-W-E-I-L-I-N, the capital of Guangxi, K-W-A-N-G-S-I province. Paul Stanley Hawkins, H-A-W-K-I-N-S, young American employee of the National City Bank of New York in Shanghai, who fled from the port city the day the Japanese occupied Shanghai's international settlement, related an interesting account of his escape upon his arrival in Guilin on January 16th. Born in Peiping 26 years ago, young Hawkins went to the United States when he was 2 years old. He returned to China in 1937 to work in the National City Bank of New York after 2 visits to China in 1929 and 1932. Hawkins was married in California only half a year ago. Leaving his wife in that state, he returned to Shanghai only 11 days before the Japanese took the Shanghai settlement. He had planned to go to Tianjin to join the staff of the bank there. After traveling and resting for 40 days, the youthful American bank employee arrived in Guilin on January 16th and is now waiting for passage to Chungking, where he will, as a second lieutenant of the United States Army Reserve Corps, report to the military attaché of the American Embassy. Following is Hawkins' story, telling how he succeeded in escaping from Shanghai and how he was treated all the way from Shanghai to Guilin. When the Pacific War broke out, I was staying in the Metropole Hotel. At about 4:30 a.m., December 8th, I was awakened by gunfire, but I went back to sleep, thinking it was an air raid. When I got up at 7 o'clock and went down to the Bund, I saw HMS Petrel, P-E-T-R-E-L, already sunk in the Huangpu, H-W-A-N-G-P-O-O river, and the USS Wake had been captured. A big Japanese naval flag was flying over the USS Wake. One Japanese destroyer and another smaller naval craft were moving up to the Bund near the customs house. There were curious people gathered around, but it was not a crowd. After I had seen the sight on the Bund, I realized that hostilities had begun between Japan on the one side and the United States and Britain on another. I decided to try to escape from Shanghai immediately. I then took a taxi to a ride-in stable in the Western District, where I saddled my 2 horses. At about 8:15 in the morning, I rode to the Japanese barrier at Great Western Road, passing Japanese sentries without difficulty. At the time of my leaving, the Japanese had not yet occupied the international settlement. Some Japanese gendarmes were patrolling the western district, and Japanese troops were moving toward the settlement. Seeing that Japanese troops were getting onto trucks at barracks just outside the perimeter, I got off the main roads, which are under Japanese control, and proceeded immediately to a country path and rode westward, avoiding Japanese posts in the meantime. I rode all day and part of the night, changing horses when one got tired. The countryside was interlaced with creeks and canals, many of which it was necessary for me to swim across with the horses, as the wooden bridges would not stand our combined weight. It rained on the first and second days of my journey. The only things I carried were 3 tins of corned beef and dog biscuits for food and a flashlight. There was no other luggage nor any weapon. About 5 hours out of Shanghai, I met some puppet troops in a village who shouted at me to stop, but I rode on. They did not open fire on me. Later, I caught sight of some military lookouts on a hill and so made a long detour to the north. During the first night, the country was so marshy that I decided to abandon my horses and go on by foot. Later that night, after 2 hours of walking, a Chinese farmer invited me to pass the night in his house, for which I was very grateful. It was still raining the next day. This was very inconvenient to me, as I carried no compass and counted on determining the direction by the sun and stars. However, I kept on going, although I saw no sun or stars during the first 2 days. Determining the direction was very much guesswork. Was very much guesswork. Was very much guesswork. Was very much guesswork.